In the fall of 1944, the United States Army Appraisal and Observer Section, headed by Colonel David Barrett, flew into China. We were a mission consisting of men from the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the State Department, and the Office of Strategic Services. We had come to make a military analysis of Communist China. We'd heard that Communist China had the largest guerrilla force in the world, a regular army numbering around 600,000, with a potential of over 2 million. We'd heard that thousands of their villages were behind Jap lines, and that 2/3 of the Japanese-conquered territory was in guerrilla hands most of the time. We'd heard many confused and garbled stories about the Chinese communists, so we had come to see for ourselves. Our official purpose was to ascertain at first hand the capabilities of the communist military forces, the extent of anti-Japanese strength, and the general condition of the people under communist government. We were also to gather data on weather conditions, survey the system of intelligence, and report the progress of the invading Japanese. Though scattered somewhat throughout China, communist strength is confined largely to the north of the Yangtze River, with a concentration in the Shan-Kenqing border region. Here is Yan'an, headquarters for both the Army and the Communist Party. Yan'an was, therefore, the first destination of our mission. Upon our arrival, we were greeted by the top-ranked leaders, both military and administrative. Mao Zedong, an almost legendary figure, chairman of the Communist Party in China and veteran of the Long March with the 8th Route Army. Chu Tai, commander-in-chief of the 18th Group Army, made up of the old 8th Route and the new 4th Armies. And Zhou Enlai, representative to the central government, and others. It was soon apparent that there was a close alliance between the people in this region and its army. For 8 years, the Japs had been trying to exterminate these people. Survival was therefore the first concern. One of the few exposed buildings in Yan'an, the auditorium in which the People's Political Council meets. The people, having set up village and county councils, elect representatives by popular secret ballot to the 3rd People's Political Council, which in turn appoints the heads of the various local governments and government committees. Although only 2/3 of the People's Political Council may be members of the regular Communist Party, the party controls the army. The connecting link between the civil commissar, who usually goes with the troops into battle. The political commissar supervises the political training not only of the people, but of the army as well. We noticed, during the welcome given us by the army, that great pride was taken in the enlightenment of each soldier. It was felt that keeping the soldiers up to date on military and other significant news made for high morale. The party line is based on the principle that only by mutual, willing cooperation between the people and the army can they hope to survive the Japanese domination, that the Communist Party is the people's party, and that its only desire is to protect the people's rights and their opportunity to earn a livelihood. Army personnel is drawn from the People's Militia, or Ming Ping, of which there are reported to be some 2,300,000. Normally occupied with tilling the fields, they are part-time guerrillas, to whose aid the regular army owes much of its success. Regular classes are held by units of the Army to instruct the King Ping in the manufacture and use of homemade landmines, and in the many and varied means of checking Japanese aggression. On the battlefield, they take care of the wounded, serve as scouts, transport war materials, and fight with whatever weapons they have or are able to make, such as crude, gas-pipe flintlocks. While we were being entertained by local dances, our hosts explained the background and organization of their society and answered questions. They wanted us to see and know everything about them. The dances were most significant. Many of them seemed to be folk dances, brought up to date with political significance. They indicated the dependence of the people upon the soil, and particularly reflected the common bond between the army and the people for mutual protection against the enemy. In these plays, the soldiers, fighting for the protection of the people's hearths and homes, are exalted as never before in Chinese history. We gathered that at least part of this presentation was a not too subtle attempt to ease the pain of taxation. However, there appeared to be an enthusiastic willingness to pay the taxes because the taxpayer feels he is doing it for the army who is guarding him and his possessions, and he feels that he is getting something in return for his money. In this particular region, taxes are paid in kind, or in money, and are based on the current price of millet. It is to the mutual benefit of the army and the people that the soldiers work in the fields when not fighting, and the wounded soldier is properly cared for and hidden from the invading enemy. As the Army must be self-sufficient, it maintains its own vegetable farms, and cabbage is a part of the soldier's diet. His average meal consists of cabbage, a little mutton, perhaps some pork. Although here you see only the outdoor dye works, a uniform factory we visited was turning out as many as 500 winter uniforms a day for the Army. With basic requirements so unfulfilled, school children learn basic crafts, and, with practically no facilities, the communists seem to be doing a very good job of educating their youth. They have free compulsory education, primary and middle schools, technical schools and colleges, even a college for women. Even the primary schools last nearly all day, with alternate periods of spinning and weaving, study, recreation, and song. When we looked in on the Army training program, we learned that the course covered 2 years and that there is a waiting list for volunteers. Because mass military strategy is not normally used against the Japanese, the training accentuates guerrilla tactics. In addition to the usual courses in marksmanship and bayonet practice during the year, much of the training seems to be devoted to political indoctrination. Competition is encouraged, and rewards are given for proficiency in such activities as grenade throwing and sports. The soldiers have a reputation for agility, and the Chinese press has already given them the nickname human monkeys. Their day starts at 5 a.m. and ends at 9 at night. They have an hour's exercise, breakfast. Each company has its own cook and commissariat. 2 hours of drill, 2 hours political lectures and discussions, 1 hour rest period, 2 hours character study, 2 hours of games and sports, then dinner, songs, and group meetings. The trained Chinese soldier comes to his graduation with a high degree of military discipline, political morale, and the will to victory. Only a small share of the equipment used by the Army is made in North China. However, one arsenal we visited claimed to be turning out 10 knee mortars and from 250 to 300 knee mortar projectiles a week. The supply of rifle cartridges was irregular, because it depended upon how many shell casings they could recover for reloading after a battle. It was obvious that they had a crying need for ammunition. The partisan forces have a policy of avoiding regular engagements with the Japs and specializing in catching them off balance. They depend upon speed, surprise, courage, and flawless maneuvers. They don't believe in fighting and losing battles. Therefore, they have careful and detailed plans of attack and retreat worked out in advance. They hit at their enemy's weaknesses, and although they have undergone terrible sacrifices in fighting, they have had phenomenal success. Mao Zedong referred to his soldiers as fleas, mobile, stinging, persistent, and uncatchable. We would probably call them commandos. With a pole-cutting demonstration, we introduced the Chinese to primacord. They were surprised at the destructive power of our explosives during the rail-cutting tests. At Yan'an, we met Lieutenant J.P. Baglio, a 14th Air Force fighter pilot who was rescued by the communists after being forced down in North China. He owed much of his happiness to Lieutenant Whittlesey, Air Ground Aid Section, who had set up a rescue outfit in which the American, Dr. Ma Haite, or known as George Hatem back home, served as an interpreter. With the latest radio equipment, we easily set up to transmit messages back to Chongqing. The communist radio network was rather shaky. The Englishman, Michael Lindsay, stated it was due to a lack of facilities, and that there were many qualified operators if they had the sets to operate. They have a local newspaper. In it are published the weekly notices of the party, the latest radio bulletins, and articles on the progress of the war. The people, including members of the army, are encouraged to contribute, and special columns are provided for praises and criticisms in which the current gripes and eulogies may be expressed. While we were fulfilling our mission, General Patrick Hurley visited Yan'an. As you know, he is the ambassador to China from the United States. As China and the United States are at war against a common enemy, Japan, it is to the best interests of the United Nations that China oppose that enemy with the united front. We must agree with those Chinese who cry, "Chinese must not fight Chinese. We must unite to oppose Japanese imperialism. We must win back our lost homeland." General Hurley had come to Yan'an to talk to Mao Zedong and to take General Zhou Enlai back to initiate negotiations for the solidification of diversified factions into a united China. This is a grave and difficult assignment, and we must keep in mind that whatever we may think of the Chinese Communists politically, their military cooperation is important to our Army and Navy. Having expressed a desire to see everything for ourselves, we were invited to go up to the front to see the army in action. Accepting this invitation put two of us on the road for almost 2 months, and since the saddle was made of wood, on foot for most of 1,200 miles. En route, we were surprised by the modern appearance of the 19-span bridge crossing the river to the city of Suite. The city of Suite also surprised us, not only because it was the largest city we visited on our trip, but primarily because it was undemolished. It was very unlike Yan'an, where bombing attacks had forced hospitals and most of the other activities needing shelter into caves. On the way to the Chin Sui area to visit the 120th Division, our safari had to cross the Yalu River. As we were being covered against the possible Japanese attack by the 8th Route Army men in their fortifications across the river, we were reminded of what we had read about the Long March. We could imagine the hardships that the 20,000 survivors endured on their 6,000-mile walk from Fujian to northwest Shanxi, over 18 mountain ranges and across 24 rivers. Piles of rubble that used to be towns and villages were frequent, and the remains stand as a constant threat of the consequences of Japanese invasion. Near the village of Sanqiao, we got in on a real show. Troops of the 120th Division showed us what a typical attack against a Japanese blockhouse looked like. Having been carefully planned in advance with the use of a model of the objective, the attack was directed by General Liu Chen-sao, commander of the Chinsui Border Region Army. After having lost great numbers of troops, the Japs had adopted what could be termed a fort policy. Moving into new territory, they constructed outpost forts with enforced labor. From these, they could emerge at strategic periods and pacify surrounding territory. By securing each conquest with a blockhouse, the Japs could expand and hold with some degree of permanence. The Chinese objective, therefore, was to take and destroy each blockhouse. They lost many men in these campaigns because they had no artillery. Although their supply of arms and ammunition is very limited, it is estimated that the communist guerrillas dispose of a total of 50,000 Japs a year. Their motto is, a Jap for every bullet. The People's Militia flock to a battle, just like Americans go to a fire, and they are very much part of the cheering when the blockhouses fall. Since their manpower is also limited, they cannot spare the soldiers to hold forts after taking them, so they burn them down. In gratitude for their liberation, the people of Sanqiao stage a celebration. We were told that the estimate was 90%, of the weapons used by the communist forces were captured, and we were able to confirm this in Chin Sui, at least as to type. Instructions in the use of captured Japanese equipment came from the prisoners taken. The Chinese treat their prisoners extremely well. They had uniquely organized their treatment into what is called the Japanese People's Emancipation League, an organization composed of Japanese army and civilian personnel who have been captured or who have voluntarily deserted. As soon as prisoners are taken, they are turned over to the nearest branch of the Emancipation League. After the Japanese soldier has recovered from the confusion of good food and Chinese friendship, he is told that the communists have no hard feelings against the people of Japan, and that their common enemy should be Japanese imperialism. Such handling of prisoners often gains valuable results, both in converts and intelligence. In one instance, out of 2,500 Jap prisoners captured, 400 were converted, and the other 2,100 allowed to return to the Jap lines. Emancipation League members enjoy complete freedom. They stage their own plays and dances. Some were so completely won over that they voluntarily turned out to help the Chinese construct an airfield big enough for our B-24s. Having completed our analysis of Communist China, we prepared to leave its hospitality. There had been every indication that its cooperation in our fight against Japan would be boundless, that such a fight is their first principle, and that no people is more anxious to reach the date of world victory over fascism.